My name is Dr. Mitchell Gibson, and this is the Spiritual World 2015. We did a video a while ago called The Spiritual World, and it was very successful. In this video, we're going to update our information on the spiritual world. The spiritual world could be explained scientifically if we looked at some data regarding what the spiritual world could be scientifically. In this graph, you see that scientists have divided the universe into dark energy, dark matter, intergalactic gas, and stars in regular space. As you can see, dark energy, which is something we can't see, touch, or measure, is most of what's out there. Dark matter is also another part of what is out there. And together they make up 96% of you, me, and everything else. The physical world and dark matter are depicted in this picture, and it shows that the physical world only shows up as little bright spots. The rest of the world, the rest of the universe that exists out there, looks like something that is like a spider web or a lace, and is something that could point to a whole new world of reality. The next world, the spiritual world, may well look like a gold web-like structure. And this golden web-like structure could be what we could determine to be the spiritual world. For the purposes of our get-together, we're going to say that this is the spiritual world. This is another NASA depiction or model of what the physical world and the worlds around us look like. Again, the physical world is only what you see in these little bright spots. NASA determined that there are other worlds, other universes, other types of reality all around us, and probably intermixing with our own reality in such a way that we really can't see what's there, but there may be evidence in how it interacts with us, and it may show us that there is a reality around us that we have to start to take into account. And this, my friends, could be the spiritual world. In the spiritual world, as we take it into account as part of our reality, there are some places in our world that just don't make sense. These places might be where our two worlds coexist. In some religions, they call them the soft places, or they might be places where mythology reigns or mythological stories are told. But as we look at these places, as we look at reality as we know it, we begin to see that these two worlds, our two worlds, may coexist. So for the beginning of our get-together, our discussion, our talk, we've created a list, sort of a top 10 Letterman-style list, to show you some mysterious places that exist in our world that may be places where the physical world and the spiritual world come together. And we call these places the top 10 mysterious places in our world. The first one is called Hangar Fort in India. Now, this is actually a palace, and it's been abandoned, and I think there is some tourism that is allowed there sort of intermittently. But for the most part, people are not allowed to spend the night there. It is a place where very mysterious and very dangerous interactions occur. It is said that in this place, when a person visits it, you really don't come out of the place the same way, and you are not allowed to visit the place at night at all. This place made our list because it could be very well one of the first places that the spiritual world and the physical world interact. In Hangar Fort, there's some strange occurrences that go on. Let's look at some of these occurrences. Hangar Fort is on the route to Jaipur and Alwar in Rajasthan, India. And according to legend, Singhia, who was a black magic practitioner, cursed the palace so that everybody who died in the palace would stay there for centuries without the ability of being reborn. Now that's an evil thing for anybody to do. But legend has it that this man had a grudge against the owner of the palace. The owner of the palace didn't do something that the black magic practitioner wanted him to do, and so he cursed the place. Now, in Hinduism and in many parts of India, there is a belief that when the soul dies, or when the body dies, the soul can reincarnate in another place. Well, if a person dies in this particular palace, there is no reincarnation. There is no going back to another place. You just stay trapped in this particular palace, wandering around for centuries. And that was the curse that Sangha created. The curse indicated that Sangha created a pocket of the spiritual world in this place. It's also interesting to point out that all the houses in this area are built without roofs, because whenever the houses are built with roofs on them, the roof will collapse. Nobody knows why these roofs collapse. Nobody knows why these places that are built just as soundly and strongly as any other place in India, why these places just come apart. Also, when people visit this place, Bangar Fort in India, they experience anxiety, they experience restlessness, and it's also said that nobody returns from this place who stays there after dark. There are a number of missing persons reports associated with this place, so that everybody who visits here and stays there after dark doesn't come back. So now the government of India in this particular place has put up signs, and in the signs they point out that one cannot stay in Bangar Fort overnight. So now the place is banned from overnight visitors. I believe that this is a place where the spiritual world and the physical world have been forced to intermingle. And I think that intermingling was created by a dark magician. This is another place, Humberstone and Lenoria in Chile. In this place, there are two abandoned mining towns that were recently actually featured on the Sci-Fi Channel on a show called Destination True. In 1872, this town was founded as a saltpeter mine, and business boomed. However, after several heavy financial blows, including the Great Depression, the town declined and business just went to nothing. The town itself collapsed in 1958, and Humberstone and Lenoria were abandoned in 1960. The difficult thing about these two towns is that the treatment of the workers was considered to be bordering on slavery. And now the towns have been totally abandoned and they've been left standing derelict. There's nobody living there that we know of, and some very strange paranormal things go on there that really kind of require us to look into it a little bit. When the towns were founded in 1872, there were no reports of any supernatural or paranormal things going on. But since the treatment of the workers was so bordering on evil and slavery, and the deaths of the workers were very mysterious in some very unusual ways, some things began to happen in the town that made it make our top 10 list, and I put it on the number 9 spot in this list. Let's look at what some of these things are in Humboldt and Humberstone and Lenoria. It's rumored that the dead in the Lenoria cemetery rise at night and walk around the town. Ghostly images are frequently seen showing up in photographs in Humberstone. These towns are so terrifying that the residents of nearby Kie refuse to even go into the town. They say that the former residents never left, and they can be seen walking around, and children have been heard playing. Many people are buried here with their coffins open and uncovered, and nobody knows why this is. So if we look at why this might be happening, it seems that there could be a pocket of spiritual energy trapped in this area, possibly because of the treatment of the people that died there. Quite often when people are treated very badly, their spiritual energies remain trapped in an area and actually can create a pocket of divine or spiritual force in a particular area. Now, the question comes up is why their coffins are open and uncovered. The question of zombies come to mind. I'm a medical doctor, I'm a man of science, But there are many things that science can't explain. And there have been reports of zombies and people walking around who have died, and some people who got up out of their coffins in this area. Number 8, Changi Beach Park. Changi Beach is probably the scariest place in China. My family and I have been to China on a number of occasions, but we've never quite been to Changi Beach. And this is one of the scariest and probably one of the most unusual places in China. Numerous people have visited this place, and they've complained of strange screaming as well as crying in the area. Some reports even claim glimpses of wandering dead bodies, most of them headless and moving around on the beach. Why would headless dead bodies be moving around on the beach? But there are reports of these all over Changi Beach. Most of the bodies are headless, and there were reports of beheadings during the Changi Beach massacres. Some of these ghosts even left bloodstains on visitors' clothes. That is more than a little scary. On Changi Beach, a horrible massacre happened here during World War II. On February 20th, 1942, 66 Chinese males were lined up along the edge of the sea and shot by Chinese military police. We don't know why they were shot. We don't know what charges were levied against them. We don't know why these men were chosen, why these 66 men in particular. But the beach was the first of the killing sites of the Suk Chung massacre. This was a massacre in which a large number of people were killed by the Japanese military police. There's a memorial there now that you're seeing in this particular image. On this beach, there are a number of these victims that now walk around trapped between worlds. Quite often when people are trapped between worlds, a pocket of spiritual energy opens and they cannot leave. It may just be that Changi Beach Park, is one of the areas where the spiritual world and the physical world interact. And for this reason, it makes number 8 on our top 10 mysterious list. Let's go to number 7. Number 7 on our list is the Mines of Paris. What you're seeing in this image are the skulls of thousands and thousands of people that were gathered and kept. These skulls that you're seeing in this particular image are unknown. They could be the skulls of people who died during the Middle Ages. They could be the skulls of people who died in many parts of Paris. But the Mines of Paris is the name that's actually given to the tunnels beneath the city. Even visiting these mines attracts heavy penalties, and it's totally illegal to even go down there. These mines were used in the past to dig out minerals and are now unsafe. They're not patrolled by the police, and they are totally unkempt. There are thousands upon thousands of skulls of people who have died, who've been stored in this area for an unknown reason. This may indeed be another place where the spiritual world and the physical world have come together. There have been some strange reports in this place, as in the other places on our top 10 list. In this particular place, there have been several reports of spirits dwelling in these tunnels because they're full of human bones that can be seen everywhere. And some of these are hundreds of feet below the surface. We don't know why these skeletons and these bones were stored in this area in this way. We just have no idea as to why there is. And there are hundreds of thousands of these skulls that have been buried many hundreds of feet below the city of Paris. It may be that these people who were buried there, and it doesn't look like it was a proper burial because it's just bones lying out in the open. Some are stacked, some are just laying out in the middle of these tunnels. It may be that these people are looking for some sort of order or some sort of way to get out of this area and go into a place where they can have a proper rest after their interment. But why would hundreds of thousands of skulls and bones be trapped in a mine this way? Very mysterious, extraordinarily mysterious. Number 6 on our list, Sanji in Taiwan. You'll notice that many of the places that we're going to talk about as we go toward the top of our list are places that are listed in Southeast Asia and in Asia Minor. North of Taiwan, there's a futuristic pod village that was initially built as a luxury vacation retreat for the rich. It was totally abandoned, but as you can see from this image, it was going to be spectacular. There were, however, some numerous fatal accidents during construction, and production was halted. Nobody knows why these accidents occurred. Nobody knows what happened. Nobody knows why so many people died. But over time, a combination of lack of money, lack of willingness, meant that the work was going to stop, and it stopped permanently. And these alien-like structures remain as if there were some remembrance of those lost. Number 5, Gunkanjima, Japan. Again, another one of these places in Asia and the Far East in this particular case. It's also known as Gunkanjima, or Battleship Island, thanks to its high sea walls. And when you look at it, it kind of looks like a battleship sitting out in the middle of the water, but it's not. It's an island. It was built in 1890 when a company called Mitsubishi, which we all know now for many things, bought the island and began a project to retrieve coal from the bottom of the sea. This attracted a lot of attention, and in 1916 they were forced to build Japan's first large concrete building on the island. There were some apartments built there that were erected both to accommodate seas of workers and to protect them from hurricanes. Then some very, very strange things began to happen in this place. On Gunkanjima in 1959, the population had swelled to a density of 835 people per hectare, and for the whole island, 1,391 per hectare for the residential district. This was one of the highest population densities ever recorded worldwide, rivaling that of Manhattan and Shanghai and Paris. Petroleum, however, began to replace coal in Japan in the 1960s, and coal mines began shutting down all over the country. And Hashima's mines were no exception. Those were the mines where all the coal was extracted. And in 1974, Mitsubishi officially announced the closing of the mine. And today, it's empty and bare, and travel is currently prohibited from going there. Next one is a very mysterious place, and actually one of my favorites to even discuss. Kowloon, the walled city. One day I'm going to do a book, or at least a novel, on Kowloon, the walled city. This is a very unusual place. The walled city of Kowloon was located just outside of Hong Kong during the British rule. It was a former watch post to protect the area against pirates, and it was occupied by Japan during World War II and was subsequently taken over by squatters after Japan's surrender. Neither Britain nor Japan wanted to take responsibility for it, so it became its own lawless city. And you can see in this picture, it's kind of a ragged-looking, ragtag city. There are skyscrapers on the borders of it, but inside, it's a totally different kind of place. It was surrounded by dirt and muck, and it had its own power supply, and people that went in there were really taking their lives into their hands. It was a kind of place that had it was so dark and the walls were so tall that light didn't reach to the streets of the city. It was a kind of place where, if you went in there, it was run primarily by criminals. And criminals had total sway over everything that went on inside of Kowloon. Some people believed that Kowloon was a place where the underworld manifested on Earth. There was no law there. It was a place where brothels, casinos, opium dens, cocaine parlors, food courts that served dog meat and God knows what else, and secret factories that ran unmolested by the authorities. It was finally torn down in 1993. Now let's just for a minute take a look at this city, this place. Kowloon was totally unpatrolled by police, so everything you could imagine went on there. Some people believe that a part of the underworld or part of hell itself manifested in this area. The brothels, casinos, and opium dens were only part of what went on there. There was a thought that certain illegal and certain horrible types of games went on there. There was a belief that demons ran the place, and that as a result, the city itself was really not a part of our world. So Kowloon, the walled city of China, was a very mysterious place that doesn't exist anymore, but it made number 4 on our list of very, very mysterious places. Number 3, we're getting toward the top of the list now, the Himalayan mountain region. Now, everybody knows about the Himalayas. Everybody knows where they are. Everybody knows that the Himalayas are the tallest mountains in the world. The Himalayas are home to a number of very big mysteries. There are, for instance, accounts of immortal beings residing in the Himalayas. Both scientists and military people have seen images and actual people sitting on the Himalayas at altitudes of 25,000 feet meditating. They've also seen people walking around, talking, having conversations in groups. There have been reports of beings flying from peak to peak in the Himalayas as well. All of these from very reputable sources. Himalayas are also home to a very strange being, the Yeti, or the abominable snowman. Try to say that 3 times fast. Abominable snowman is said to inhabit the Himalayas of Tibet and Nepal. Indian military personnel have reported seeing many of these beings in different heights and different shapes, 8, 10, 12 feet tall in some instances. They've also reported seeing ghost sightings of dead climbers and soldiers up there. In many instances, these dead soldiers, dead climbers will talk to you, they'll have a conversation, they'll help you find your way, and not all of these can be taken for granted or just dismissed outright. What we have again is another instance of the spiritual world and the physical world interacting in a place of actually a very unlikely place, the Himalayas. Let's move to number 2. Number 2 on our top 10 mysterious places and the spiritual world interface is the Konghua Pass in China. This is a pass that is on the disputed Indian-Chinese border of Aksai Chin. The Chinese-held part is known as Aksai Chin, and the part held under the Indian occupation is called Ladakh. This part of the world is a very strange place, as with all of the places we talk about are very strange places. But this one is strange in part because even when a tourist gets a pass to go there and visit there, when they get to this border, they're often turned back, almost always turned back. Also, this is one of the highest reported places where UFOs are seen. There is another incident or another problem with this place that we should probably talk about, and it puts it near the top of the list. In this particular place, we find that there are a strange number of reports, or an exceptionally large number of reports, of UFOs. Locals on both sides of the border believe that it is an underground UFO base in this region, with the knowledge of both countries essentially knowing about it and trying to keep it quiet. Locals in the area have seen UFOs coming up out of the ground. Tourists are denied entry into this part of the area despite having permits to travel between both countries. By agreement, both countries do not patrol this border. They believe that there is a highly civilized technology that is existent there that they can't understand, and they have no real way to interface with it or to control it. So both countries have agreed that they will not patrol this area. In this case, it is the interface of an alien world with our own world. It is indeed one of the strangest and most mysterious places in the world. But now let's get to number 1 on our list, and you'll see why it earned that top spot. Number 1, Jatinga, Assam district of India. The village of Jatinga in the Dima Hasal district of Assam has a population of about 2,500 people. The village, however, is world famous for its phenomenon of bird suicides. Over 44 different species of migratory birds take part in this mass suicide. Just sit and think about that for a moment. 44 different species of birds killing themselves in one place. Most of the migratory birds visiting this area never leave the village and just drop to their deaths on the street. Nobody knows what's killing them. Nobody knows why so many different species of migratory birds die in this particular place. In this picture, you can see some of the birds flying in there, and they usually do it in the evening, and they just drop dead for no particular reason. 44 different species of migratory birds just killing themselves in one place at one time. They also do this at one particular part of the year. These birds plummet to their death precisely between 6 o'clock and 9:30 on moonless nights between September and October. These mass suicides occur on a specific 1 mile by 600 square foot strip of land, and this phenomenon has said to occur year after year for more than a century without a break. Scientists have no explanation. They don't know why birds would come to India on September to October between 6 and 9:30 and die, just drop and die. They have theories, the scientists, but they have no exact explanation as to why this would happen. My theory is that a pocket of the spiritual world opens up between 6 o'clock and 9:30 for birds on moonless nights between September and October. This pocket of the spiritual world is a way that the birds can leave the physical world, leave their bodies, and go into the spiritual world. Exactly what kills them is a mystery to me as well. But it's, in my opinion, the strangest and most mysterious place in the world. So now that we've looked at a number of these places, are these cases of the spiritual world and the physical world existing side by side? The spiritual world and the physical world, according to many scientists and many spiritual teachers, myself included, coexist. There must be, however, some laws or some ways that we can understand the spiritual world and the physical world, and some ways that we can look at what rules sort of control how these two worlds interface and what happens in these two worlds so that they live and coexist side by side. In the spiritual world and in the physical world, let's take a look at some of the laws and some of the physics and some of the metaphysics that control this place. The physical world is surrounded by an invisible world that can't be detected by the senses. Let us call this the spiritual world. For centuries, people have been reporting interactions with beings from other dimensions of reality. Some are called ghosts. Some are called elementals. Some are even called demons. And with these interactions, every time there's an interaction, the story and the legend of these interactions and the dimensions that they come from grows around us. Scientists call these dimensions of reality dark matter and dark energy. These are not metaphysical terms, these are physical terms, the hardest physics you can imagine. In this image, we see the interaction of dark matter, dark energy, and the physical world. As we've said earlier, the physical world is depicted only as these little bright spots. If the physical world is surrounded by an invisible world that we can't see, that we can't touch, that we can't measure in any reasonable form, what are these dimensions of reality? What forces control the interface between physical matter and metaphysical or spiritual matter? What are these forces? Let's take a look at what some of these forces might be if we look at them in spiritual terms. The first grouping we're going to describe are called universal factors. Universal factors control the basic structure, function, organization of all life in the universe. Each of these factors permeate all matter, and they descend into the physical world from the higher dimensions of reality through what we call primordial cosmic radiation. Cosmic radiation surrounds everything that exists. A scientist discovered this at the beginning of the 20th century, received a Nobel Prize for it. These factors can be considered to be the highest energy matter particles that we know of. We don't really understand where they all come from. They are supposed to come from the stars, from the sun, from the galaxies, from distant supernova, but that doesn't really explain their high energy and their constant presence in our planet. These factors are intelligent, and they're capable of guiding and evolving the spiritual evolution of mankind. Universal factors come in different shapes, sizes, and form, just as all the different primordial cosmic radiation particles come in different shapes, sizes, and form. So as we examine the universal factors and their ability to shape matter and shape reality around us, let's look at what some of the properties of these universal factors might be and how they can interact with and shape our lives and our reality. Let's look at the first one. The very first one we're going to look at are the 9 main dimensions of reality. Each of these dimensions emerge from the source. And as these dimensions emerge, they become more and more subject to the laws of chaos. These dimensions are controlled and shaped by these universal factors. Scientists accept that there are actually more than 9 dimensions of reality. And all of these dimensions of reality are around us in such a way that they always are impacted by universal factors. These 9 dimensions of reality include the first dimension, which is a point of reality, the second dimension, which can be considered 2 dimensions, length and width, third dimension, length, width, and depth, fourth dimension, including the dimension of time, and fifth dimension, 6th, 7th, 8th, and 9th. We're going to discuss those in a lot more detail in just a little bit. The vast majority of the universe is made of energy, and the spiritual world and the physical world are connected through a complex network of these energies. Human consciousness can interface with the spiritual world through the use of energy. And when we look at this energy and we look at how the universal primordial factors affect us and how consciousness interfaces with the spiritual world, we have to come up with a basic model. We will get back to the universal factors and the dimensions of reality, but we first have to make a premise. How does the physical world and the spiritual world interact? How are they connected in our consciousness? Consciousness is how we perceive things. How can human consciousness interface with the spiritual world through the use of energy? There must be some medium, some foundation, something to connect the particles of the information factors, particles of dark matter, dark energy. How do we interface those areas of reality? And spiritually, I have a theory. The theory depends on something called spiritual DNA. Spiritual DNA is a method through which human consciousness interfaces with the spiritual world. We have human DNA, which is a molecule that is very complex, double helix molecule, which was discovered and made famous by Watson and Crick, though some people would argue it was discovered beforehand. But let us just say that Watson and Crick did discover it. They made the molecule famous, and it is the molecule through which information, a great deal of information, is transmitted from generation to generation. All humans and almost every cell in the body has a lot of DNA, but the spiritual part of the DNA is a part of the DNA that lays down the information track so that physical DNA can be laid down. Remember, when you are created, you are one cell, and that one cell has DNA from your mother and from your father. But by the time we reach adulthood, we have trillions of cells. And each of these cells are organized as to the organ they're going to function in, the type of function in the organ, and each one of these cells has over 100,000, 100,000 different types of biochemical reactions going on inside the cell. The spiritual DNA is the part of the cell, or the part of the DNA, that lays down the information necessary for DNA to function and to recreate itself. Spiritual DNA is the energy precursor to physical DNA. Parts of the energy matrix of the universe is composed of spiritual DNA. It is a basic unit of consciousness. Scientists have found large spiral tracts of double helix molecules floating in space. DNA can begin to be active under the influence of light alone. DNA can react to radio waves, it can react to laser waves, it can also react to mantras, it can react to consciousness. DNA is a living, breathing molecule, but it also has a very strong energy component. It is not just physical matter. DNA has the ability to listen to a sound and react specifically to that particular sound. Laser beams can affect DNA in such a way that a DNA molecule will change. We don't understand why DNA does that physically, but spiritually or energetically, if you add an energetic component to DNA, then we see that DNA, spiritually and physically, is necessary as a basic unit of consciousness. Spiritual DNA links all of the different types of consciousness throughout the universe into a functional unit called collective unconsciousness. Now let's just examine this just for a moment. All of us are connected through our DNA. 99.999% of humans have the same DNA. A very small percentage of your DNA is necessary to make you an individual. If you look at your DNA and the DNA of 99.99% of the rest of the people in the world, you'll find that your DNA is exactly the same. It doesn't vary much from race to race, doesn't vary much from male to female. Obviously, males have some different characteristics, but when you get past the sex chromosomes and the sex characteristics, we look pretty much the same at the molecular level. In this case, it points to the fact that there's a consciousness, both unconscious and conscious, that is connected through the similarities in our DNA that can be pointed back to a spiritual or an energetic link. This is called spiritual DNA. This energetic link is something that we all have in common. It links physical DNA to the universal factors. I told you we'd get back to that. The universal factors energetically come into the universe, come into our planet, come into our world, and interact with spiritual DNA in such a way that it begins to create changes in consciousness and in the physical body. Universal factors travel throughout all the 9 dimensions. They travel throughout all the planets, all the galaxies, all the stars. And once spiritual DNA and the universal factors interact, consciousness is affected. Now, as it travels through the different levels of reality, it travels through different levels of dimensional reality as well. And when universal factors and spiritual DNA and DNA link, different levels of consciousness are created through the different universes of our reality, or different dimensions of our reality. In this way, higher consciousness and lower consciousness are created. Higher consciousness and lower consciousness are definitely linked to spiritual DNA. Each of the universal factors interacts with this physical world through energy and sound. The sound and energy interaction is mediated through the coordinated action of both physical and spiritual DNA. So that each of us has spiritual DNA and physical DNA that is coordinated in its action through the universal factors. Each of the universal factors has a specific function that it performs in relation to our DNA. When we look at the individual spiritual factors, or the universal factors, we can begin to understand how these interactions create different effects on the soul, on the mind, and on the body. So let us take a look at some of the particular functions of the universal factors and how they might create different changes in the spiritual world around us. The first of the universal factors we're going to talk about is called the A factor. This factor is the first universal factor that was discovered spiritually, and it's called the first cause or the emergence of God into the universe. It is a self-propagating energy that causes God consciousness to be spread all over the universe. A factor gives rise to what we call the primordial beings, or the first beings that exist in the universe. Primordial beings live on primordial worlds, which are worlds that are more energy than matter. A factor is the very first factor that controls or contains the will or intelligence that we experience in the universe, that we experience as consciousness. Willpower, or the force to drive and succeed or to be in life, is in part related to the emergence of A factor. This is the first energy that was recognized, and it is what we call the factor, the most basic factor for consciousness and intelligence. But it is not the only universal factor that has been discovered. The next factor that was discovered is called B factor. B factor creates an urge to reunite with all creation and the source of creation. This force is the genesis of what we call spiritual evolution, or the desire to be greater than what we are. Creator gods and primordial beings generated this force, or generated by this force, are responsible for what we call spiritual growth, evolution, and enlightenment. The B factor is also a factor by which a person may create a religion, they may create a spiritual practice, and it's the force that causes us to want to evolve beyond where we are at present spiritually. It is the first factor that a person can relate to as what we would call a personal factor. Even though it's a universal factor, it's one of the first factors that causes us to be able to look at the universe and say, I want to be out there. I want to be part of whatever I see as part of the universe. I want to be more than what I am. Universal factor is the first factor that causes us to look at the universe and say, I want to evolve. The B factor of the universal factors. Another of the universal factors that was discovered is called the X factor. The X factor. Sounds like a good title for a movie or a good book. Have to keep that in mind. It's also called the immortality factor. It's a force which originated in the fifth dimension and acts on third dimensional matter. It's a factor that originates from the fifth dimension and acts on third dimensional matter. The X factor's ultimate action is to transform dormant DNA, the 97% of your DNA that just sits there, because scientists have discovered that it only takes a small portion, about 3% of your DNA, to code for every organ, every muscle, every bone, every tissue in your body. But the action of the X factor, which is another universal factor, causes the human tissue, the physical tissue, organs, bones, tissue, blood, everything, to be turned into an immortal light form. I did a book called The Human Body of Light, where we discuss this in detail, and that the human body can indeed turn from physical matter into immortal light matter. The X factor. The X factor is, as we said, responsible for the creation of the light body. It's also the home of fifth dimensional consciousness, but can be generated from the physical form. What you're looking at is called a golden ring soul talisman, a very interesting object. It's a very holy object indeed. These tiny beads are the remains of a physical body of an enlightened master who turned his body into light. The ring souls grow and multiply, and they change shape over time. And they have many physical properties, miraculous properties. They can cause healings. They can cause transmutation of matter. They can cause organs to regenerate. They can amplify the energy of prayer. The golden ring soul talisman is the most powerful, one of the most powerful spiritual objects in the world, and it contains this power in part because it radiates the X factor from the ring souls. Ring souls are connected to the body of the spiritual master from which they emanate, and they are very powerful sources of a universal factor. The golden ring so talisman is a very powerful reminder that universal factors can interact with us in a physical, personal way. Now let's get to some of the lower force factors. The Y factor is a force that's generated also from the fifth dimension, but it also creates a desire that we call intellect, which is a lower form of consciousness. It creates the higher form of subconsciousness and also unconsciousness, but from that it generates intellect. Y factor also creates the desire to breathe. Immortal beings, many of them, do not have to breathe oxygen or air. They can live underwater, they can live in outer space, they can live in stars because they don't need oxygen and air the way humans do. The force of Y factor causes the desire to breathe. It also results in a disharmony in the cosmos and generates a physical universe in the four lower unit dimensions. Our dimension is dominated by the effect of the Y factor. Y factor is the force that creates what we see as mortality. In the higher dimensions, most of the beings that we meet are immortal. Humans have the potential for immortality, but this immortality potential is not realized in most people. It is dormant in most people because of the Y factor. Z factor is another universal factor. It's a self-destructive force. It causes anxiety, worry, stress, pain, and suffering. It also makes a person want to have something better. It strips away what we call impurities of physical life and makes a person want to return to the higher dimensions in the Godhead. It's self-destructive because inside of Z factor is a desire to kill oneself or to kill others. It is one of the factors that causes destruction in many ways. It causes murder. It causes suicide. It can cause disease, illness, and aging. The Z factor is one of the reasons why humans suffer so much. It's a factor that comes in from the higher planes of reality, the higher dimensions of reality, and we have to deal with it in this world. As a result, it's one of the things that causes us to want to move away from this dimension and move into higher dimensions. We call this the Z factor. Overcoming the Z factor is one of the reasons we meditate, we do our spiritual practices, we pray, we make offerings, because at some point we can learn to strip off the energy of the Z factor, rise above it, and embrace the higher factors, A factor, B factor, and X factor. Z factor, as we said, is dominant in the third dimension. It also creates the ego. It causes the physical form to secrete or seek greater self-expression. The Z factor generates the third dimension. The world that we see around us is an illusion generated by the Z factor. It is a very convincing illusion. What we touch, what we smell, what we see, what we taste, what we hear, all of our senses are generated by Z factor energies. Z factor acts on consciousness to create lower dimensional aspects of what we call reality. Z factor also creates aging. Aging is an illusion caused by Z factor. When we take primordial matter or the alchemical gold, white powder of gold, it causes us to have energy and power that helps us go beyond, move beyond the Z factor. Illness and death then become something that we can strip off and walk away from them, because if you dismantle Z factor from the body, from consciousness, you remove the factors or the energies that cause death itself. Z factor and Y factor are the lower factors that cause suffering, illness, and death itself. Now, let's look at the first dimension of reality. We've looked at the factors. Now let's look at how the factors interface with the different dimensions of reality. The first dimension is a dimension of chaos. As we said, it's a dimension defined by a single point. In this dimension, all traces of life or generated life are dissolved. The third dimensional being cannot exist in the first dimension. But the first dimension is dominated by the A factor. It is a dimension of pure potential. All beings originate at some point from the third dimension, from the first dimension. Being a dimension that is chaos and void of total consciousness, it is complete unconsciousness. We all have a part of us that exists in this unconscious state. The void of the first dimension is also the home or the end result of total destruction. If you break down the particles of everything that exists and created a first dimensional entity from these particles, you would have a good representation of the first dimension. On this slide, you see what looks like a star field, but actually it's a field filled with points, individual points. This is a good representation of the first dimension. Let's take a look now at the second dimension. The second dimension of the spiritual world is called the spiritual underworld. It was formerly ruled by demons, but there was a takeover in the underworld not too long ago, within the past 100 years. And now the spiritual underworld is ruled by angels. As a matter of fact, several comic books and several spiritual legends have alluded to this, but hell is no longer ruled by demons. It is now overseen by angels. It is also the dimension of dreams, the afterlife, and the visionary reality that we get our books, our movies, our stories, and our dreams from. Each of us have a lower aspect that lives in the second dimension. We call this dimension the spiritual underworld. In this picture, you see two demons reporting to an angel. This fact that the spiritual underworld has been taken over by higher forces is a reality. And it points to a coming shift in the power in the third dimension. The third dimension is in large part, ruled by dark beings. That is going to change in the not too distant future. Let us now take a look at the third dimension. The third dimension is home to what we call physical life. It is controlled in large part by the Y and Z factors. We spend 2/3 of our lives in this dimension. Now, why do I say 2/3? Well, we spend 1/3 of our life sleeping. We cannot remain awake for our entire lifetimes. We spend 1/3 of our life sleeping, and we spend about 10 to 20% of that time in what we call the dream state or REM state. In the third dimension, our physical bodies live, we breathe, we procreate, we work, we eat, we sleep, we make love. It is our home, but it is also a vast illusion created by both the Y and Z factors. The third dimension is home to our thoughts and to our dreams. The second dimension is another dimension of reality altogether, where the astral body, which home is in the second dimension, that's where the astral body lives. But the astral body is not the same as the physical body. The third dimension is ruled by some very dark forces. In this dimension, people live and they die mostly in a state of suffering, anxiety, and expectation. Anxiety is the main emotion in this dimension, in part because the third dimension is ruled by the Z factor. The mind, instinct, and the physical body dominate spiritual consciousness in the third dimension. We have spiritual consciousness active in all the dimensions of reality. It is difficult, however, for us to use our spiritual consciousness, our spiritual awakening, our spiritual reality in this third dimension because we worry about eating. The average person on this planet lives on about $850 a year. If you live in a well-developed first world country, you don't have to worry about that. In America, the average family makes about $41,000 a year, roughly. Poverty level in our country is $23,000 a year. Just think about that for a moment. When the average person in the world lives on $850, poverty in our country is considered to be $23,000 or thereabouts. Our worries are generated in part because of the dimension we live in and the place we hold in that dimension. As we move higher in dimensional reality, the next dimension, the next highest dimension in our world, is part of our existence that is a mixture of future, parallel, past, and the imagination. It is in part fueled by the energies of our subconscious and unconscious mind. The fourth dimension is a mixture of other realities. It is part of what we see as the future, and we're constantly recreating and creating the future by what we think and by what we hope. Parallel dimensions or parallel worlds are created by our thoughts and by our thinking. The past is also affected by what we think and what we hope. Our imagination is a very powerful force for creating reality around us. When you combine all of these forces, thoughts about the future, thoughts about parallel worlds, thoughts about the past, thoughts about our imagination, we create what we call the fourth dimension. The fourth dimension is a place that is in constant flux. It is fueled by what we hope and what we see for the future, by what we hope and what we see for parallel universes. In many ways, the fourth dimension is more advanced than the third dimension because we have high hopes for our futures. The fourth dimension is in part ruled by the Y factor, but it also has some influence from the X factor. The fourth dimension is also home to beings who've evolved beyond the human condition. They're both neutral, good, and evil beings that live in this place. There are, unfortunately, beings that live in the fourth dimension that would enslave our race. There are beings that are fourth dimensional that would consume humans if given the chance. These beings are not human. There are elements of humanity that exist in the fourth dimension, but there are also elements of humanity that do not exist in the fourth dimension, or that do exist in the fourth dimension that would seek to enslave and destroy us. The fourth dimension is a very complex place. Our future emanates from the fourth dimension down into the third dimension. There are extraordinarily advanced dimensions or technologies that exist in the fourth dimension. These technologies come into our future and infiltrate into our present. As you can see from this image, you see some very advanced technologies, and there are beings that can go back and forth between the fourth dimension, our future, and the third dimension as easily as we can go from one room to another. The fourth dimension, indeed, is a very unusual and very advanced place. Now, let's take a look at the fifth dimension. The fifth dimension is the world of primordial matter. It's also the home of the worlds of light. Primordial matter is a very special type of energy that exists as a bridge between physical matter and energetic matter. Primordial matter allows a person, when you ingest it, to become an immortal, to live for many centuries, to not age, to not die, to not suffer from illness or injury, to not have consciousness waver with aging. That would be something fantastic. To have sexual potency be restored. You know, if I could get some primordial matter and make it in mass and sell it on the open market, I wouldn't have to do books anymore. But then I think I would do books just because it would be fun to be able to do books and not have to worry about supporting myself. That would be fantastic. There are highly evolved beings in the fifth dimension that seldom interact with humans. These beings that live in the fifth dimension are primarily highly evolved. On the first dimension, or third dimension rather, you very seldom meet an immortal. There are less than 300,000 immortals in our world, though there are a considerable number, but most humans will never meet one. In the fifth dimension, 97 to 99% of the beings you meet will be immortal. The fifth dimension is made more of energy than it is of matter, though there is some slight matter there. The fifth dimension is dominated by the A factor. It's also called the world of the first emergence. It's here that God first assumes an individual personality. Willpower, or the will of God himself, dominates this world. It's due to the action of A factor. In the action of A factor, the energy that is what we call fifth dimensional energy becomes more powerful. The energy that creates very strong magicians, very strong, powerful adepts, very powerful beings that come into our world as world teachers often emanates from the fifth dimension down through the fourth dimension, actually skipping the fourth dimension and coming directly into the third dimension. Higher beings that teach us, higher beings that help us evolve, emanate from the higher dimensions of reality that we call the fifth dimension. My first real spiritual teacher, a teacher that I call Dejanti, emanated from the fifth dimension. I met him when I was very young, when I was in my residency, and I've told this story many times, but when I met Dejanti, he was a being made of pure light. He was more than 8 feet tall. He floated. He had general features very similar to my own, but he didn't have what you could call skin. He didn't wear what you could call clothes, though I could see no genitalia either. He was a being that emanated warmth and love and energy from his very being. I felt him when he walked into the, actually not walked, he floated into the room. And because of my own fear, I couldn't accept that this was a being that emanated from a higher dimension of reality. The sixth dimension. This is a very complex dimension, and it generates all the lower dimensions below it. It's home to what we call higher consciousness. In order to understand what is the sixth dimension, you have to understand that you create it or recreate it every time you think about reality. Higher consciousness, higher reality is created every time we make a choice. For instance, if you're sitting in a room, you're creating multiple dimensions of reality at the same time. If you decide to get up and get a glass of water, that's one reality. If you decide to get up and get a glass of tea, that's another reality. If you decide to get up and jump off your balcony, that's a third reality. There are millions of possible, actually infinite numbers of reality that emanate from your ability to choose. The sixth dimension is one such ability, one such dimension. It creates very complex dimensions that generate all the lower dimensions. The sixth dimension is our ability to make choice into reality. As Einstein said, when we think of something, it creates a reality around that choice. Now let's take a look at the seventh dimension. Seventh dimension is difficult to describe, so let's just see what we can do with it. Seventh dimension is home to what we call the uniform codex. It's a brain consciousness that stores the matrix of all creation and all reality. All thought may be accessed here. You can look at the seventh dimension as the home to all thoughts, or the consciousness of the universe itself. Sit with that for a moment. Everything that we think has to come from somewhere. Higher races call the seventh dimension the uniform codex for a reason. The uniform codex is the brain consciousness that stores everything. Everything you think now, everything you've thought in the past, and everything you think in the future emanates from this point. Also, all the parallel dimensions of thought emanate from this point. When we see reality, when we see the dimensions of consciousness in our minds, what we're looking at is the seventh dimension. You can recognize the seventh dimension as a dimension that contains everything that you're going to think, everything that you're going to understand. It is a dimension of the reality of thought. Higher races call it the uniform codex, and now you know that name as well. Let's take a look at the eighth dimension. The eighth dimension is the home of self-generated beings that generate and program the universe and the laws that govern it. They only identify themselves as the VS3. They write the code for what we know as reality. In this really beautiful picture, you see what we could represent as the VS3. The VS3 are generated dimensional entities that write the code for everything we experience. Everything we experience can be explained in terms of mathematics. Scientists have discovered that the universe around us can be related to a mathematical code. This mathematical code is our reality. It is our ability to see reality as we know it. It is our ability to see the uniform reality of space-time as we understand it. The VS3 are a very highly advanced, extraordinarily advanced race of beings. One of many races that live inside the 8th dimension that write code for the universe. Scientists have extrapolated that behind the matrix of reality is a very complex mathematical code that generates everything that we experience. This goes in turn with what we call the VS3. Now we've described the basic 8 dimensions of reality. We've described where we are. We are in the 3rd dimension. This is a beautiful graph, a beautiful image that shows us where we are. How do we move around from one dimension to another? How do we get from one dimension to another? Where can you go when you're in the 3rd dimension? As you can see, we can see the sun existing in the 5th dimension. The sun is not a 3rd dimensional entity. What we see when we look at the sun is an illusion. We see dust and gas and heat and light emanating from the image of the sun. But that is not the sun itself. When you start to study the sun spiritually, you see some very unusual things happening around the image of the sun. We have a seminar coming up called The Solar Words of Power, but we've done many seminars on words of power and the sun that prove that the sun is a consciousness more than it is a physical entity. When we look at the universes of the world and we look at the spiritual world, what we see is that we can move from one dimension to another. But let us have a deeper understanding of what it takes to move from one dimension of reality to another. There are some very basic things that have to happen before we can move from one dimension to another. At the moment of death, the Z factor acts on the body and the soul and forces them into the 2nd dimension. When consciousness is no longer bound to the physical body, certain universal factors take over. In this way, consciousness is drawn into a 2-dimensional form and a ghost is created. This happens to more than 90% of people at the moment of death. This happens because most people don't know what to do besides allow a passage of consciousness from one dimension to another at the point of death. Most people are not trained in what you can do other than simply pass from one state to another. There are things that you can do, and there are ways that you can take advantage of the universal factors to move from one dimension of reality to another. But let's look and see what some of the options are. What we've just seen is one of the options that is taken by most people on this planet and has been taken by most people for a very long time. A human may take advantage of the various forms of the X factor in the world. The X factor transforms dormant forms of human DNA into a protein that mutates the body into a crystalline light structure. This sounds like science fiction, but it's actually not. There are hundreds of thousands of documented cases of where humans can transform themselves from a physical structure into an energetic, immortal form that is neither matter nor pure energy. It is a combination of both. There's a place called the Right Canyon Caves in Asia where many people go each year and they complete this transformation. In the Right Canyon Caves, a person is given one of these caves and they're usually visited by beings from some of the higher dimensions. They're guarded over by a physical monk, usually, and it costs about $30 a month to sponsor a person to go into the cave to make the transformation. Many of these caves were destroyed, however, in 1959, and what we have now is just a handful of these caves left. But every year, 150 to 200,000 humans make this transformation from the physical matter into spiritual energy. At the point of death, the X factor may drive the soul and the body into the 5th dimension. From the 5th dimension, the soul body may take advantage of what we call the B factor, which we discussed a little earlier. B factor drives the soul body into the 9th dimension. After this, reincarnation is not possible. The 9th dimension is beyond human comprehension. That's why we didn't put a slide on it. This happens to 3 to 5% of the human race at the point of death. At the point of death, some people know how to take advantage of the X factor to skip the fifth dimension altogether and transform themselves into pure consciousness. There are many races, many people on our planet that have this understanding and keep it to themselves. They know how to use B factor. They know how to use sunlight. They know how to use the energy of both sunrise and sunset. Combined with the energy of crystals, combined with the energy of specific mandala, you can take advantage of sunlight, solar energy, and transform yourself into pure energy. This transformation is something that happens to hundreds of thousands of humans each year. A human soul may enter the fourth dimension at the moment of death. The fourth dimension and this entering process is created by shadowing. A higher dimensional entity may shadow a third dimensional being. Shadowing occurs when a god or goddess or higher consciousness being takes an interest in you. And this happens to about 2 to 3% of humans at the moment of death. Most people transform into a ghost. And from the ghostly form, they transform into a being that can then reincarnate. However, if you make offerings to a god, if you work with higher consciousness beings, they can take an interest in you and help you transform into a being that can turn into pure light. A human soul can then be taken directly into a higher dimension, the fourth dimension, by one of these beings. Shadowing takes place during most of your life. If a being takes an interest in you, if you work with a being, they will see you as someone that they would like to shadow and work with. That's why we suggest that everyone build an altar, that everyone build something that they can use as a bridge between this world and the next world. That bridge allows you to have options when you leave the physical world. Most people believe there's only one way out of this world, but there are actually a number of ways out of this world. Lord Buddha, the goddess Kuan Yin, the god Odin, the god Thoth are very beneficial, very beneficent beings that help us move from one dimension to another. They like to shadow humans. From the fourth dimension, a soul may enter a cycle of reincarnation or just travel into higher worlds. Fourth dimensional worlds contain a large number of what we call civilizations. These civilizations are places that we can go, places that we can live, places that are options other than Earth. Earth is not the only place that we can live. Earth is only one of many places that we can live in this dimension. We can also go to higher dimensions of reality. And from those dimensions of reality, we can have choices as to where we go and where we live. Earth is not our only home. Earth is only one of many places that we can go to. Let's look at some of these special places that we can go to, these special places that we can visit that are potential homes for our consciousness. The first place we're going to look at is a place that you probably wouldn't guess as a potential home for your consciousness. There is a place, a special portal, inside the sun itself. The sun allows direct access to the fifth dimension. Its rays carry information necessary for the permanent transformation of consciousness. The sun is a place that we can call home. That is a place that we can use to transform from one level of consciousness to another. When we work with the sun, my students are able to see the sun change. They see it spin, they see it grow in size, they see it blink. Not differently than what happened around some of the great miracles of our time in Fatima, at Lourdes, at Medjugorje. We see the same types of reports happening in those places. Well, under special instruction, under special high-level training, you can communicate with the sun, and you can also project your consciousness into and through the body of the sun. There's a special portal inside the sun that has been described by many ancient cultures, most notably the Aztecs. They say that there's a triangular portal inside the sun that once you enter there, you can go into other worlds and visit other worlds with a special level of consciousness granted you by interface with the sun. The special portal in the sun is accessed through words of power, which we're going to teach in a later instructional video. Guyana. Guyana is a very special place. It's a second dimensional place that in most religions and most philosophy, we call it hell. That's right. Guyana is another word for hell, and hell is real. Hell is a real place. Hell is a place where souls enter voluntarily to cleanse themselves from impurities gathered in the third dimension. What do we mean by impurities? Impurities of thought, impurities of will, impurities of consciousness. And the soul may leave this place simply by asking to do so. When a number of people who were friends of mine passed, and I was concerned about them, I learned how to follow them and see where their consciousness went. Their consciousness, in many cases, went into a lower dimensional state. They found themselves burning, or they found themselves in rooms, they found themselves in places that we would call hell. And in some cases, I was able to help them get out. In some cases, in many cases, people wanted to stay there because they felt that they had done things so bad that they could not be forgiven. Taka Amahara is a fifth dimensional location, and it's one of thousands of cities of light that exist in the higher dimensions. All the beings who live in Taka Amahara are either immortal or extremely advanced in their state of enlightenment. Taka Amahara is a very extraordinarily advanced city. Simply by pronouncing the city in deep meditation helps a person enter into that level of consciousness of the city. Taka Amahara. Taka Amahara. Taka Amahara. When you hold that consciousness of that word in your mind, when you sleep, when you meditate, and you have to have the emotional state to go with it. You can't just hold it with a bland emotional state of anxiety or worry. You have to have joy and the consciousness of love in your mind, and that can transform you or transport your consciousness into Taka Amahara. But you need the emotional state to go with it. The normal emotional state of anxiety and stress on earth just is not going to do it. The Bardo Thadal is a real place. It's a second dimensional location that can be accessed through the gates of death and consciousness. If a person dies, one of the places you can end up is the Bardo. If you have the right level of consciousness, you can enter into the Bardo physically while you're still alive. It's a gloomy place, though. It's a place that is a rough copy of the third dimension. Most souls that enter there are not really aware that they've died, and they're not really aware of their true state. They're not aware that they don't have a physical body or a living physical body to return to. The Bardo has been written about in the Tibetan Book of Dying and many other ancient texts. It is a real place. It is a place where souls are only dimly aware or dimly conscious of their true state. Next place we're going to look at is a higher dimensional place, and it's a place you might have heard of, called Valhalla or Folkvangir. It is ruled by the gods Odin and Freya, which may be familiar to you. Odin and Freya are the leaders or the rulers of the Norse mythological pantheon. Although the pantheon is not mythological, these are real beings. Only humans, it allows humans to live as immortals when they enter Valhalla. Only humans that have virtue are allowed to even think about entering Valhalla. It is accessed by aligning with Odin and Freya during life. And requests for transit into Valhalla should be made while the person is still alive. I have actually visited Valhalla through the help of some Valkyries that I know very well, and also through my connection with Odin. It is a place that is beyond words. It is spectacular. It is definitely worth visiting, and a place that anyone would be happy visiting. This is an unusual world, First Verul. It is a real world. It's a large world with gigantic moons, more than 100 times the size of our Earth. The average lifespan on this planet is 600 years. They have very little technology and very advanced in astral and celestial sciences. In other words, They have an extensive presence in more than 2,000 worlds and 40 galaxies, and more than 90% of this population is enlightened. They have discovered and learned how to use words and consciousness to control reality. So when you visit First Verul, first thing you notice is there's not a lot of buildings, there's not a lot of technology. The technology that exists there is celestial and consciousness-based. So by understanding their technology, you will be able to see and communicate with them, but you communicate with them differently. Also, there's a race called the Ashan. The Ashan is a spacefaring race, and they're very helpful to humans. They live on planet-sized ships, however, and these ships never land. There are more than 2 million years ahead of us in technology, and they have a communal structure. They have no death, no disease, and no poverty. They are explorers, and if you're born on that ship, you'll be raised by communal caretakers. They have no human emotions. They have very little death, they have no disease, they have no suffering, and they've mastered most of the universal factors as an energy source. Very helpful, very beneficent. There is no crime on an Ashan ship. What they do is explore the galaxy. And on their ship, they have planetary environments that look very much like Earth. So a person coming from Earth would be very comfortable there. To visit the Ashan, hold their name as a word in your consciousness at the point of death. The Ashan. This is another unusual state called VVV-A61-AT. One can be reborn within a fully self-contained digital matrix module that simulates any reality you can think of. By holding the code word VVV-A61-AT, you can incarnate on one of these modules. They can sustain a human soul indefinitely. Repeat the name VVV-A61-AT, and you can be reborn on one of these modules. In this module, you can create any form of life that you can think of. You can be reborn as a tree, you can be reborn as an animal, you can be reborn as a bird or a fish or a rock or as a mountain or as a star. But all of it is created on these modules. These modules allow a human being to live and create any form of reality you desire. It is a wonderful place to incarnate, and it's also a wonderful place that is a respite from the suffering of dimensional life. VVV-A61-AT. Bosgare is a secondary planetary city. The Bosgare are a race of humanoids that are phenotypically very close to humans. They look like us, but they're a little bit taller, 7 to 8 feet tall. There are 7-foot tall humans, but they're rare. Their cities span entire planets, and their culture is 1,000 years ahead of ours. They are legendary hedonists, and their average lifespan is 250 years. Now, what do I mean by legendary hedonists? They do everything that comes to mind when it relates to pleasure. They have parties that last for weeks. They have drugs that get you high without damaging the body. They have ways of having sex that allow a person to have sex as much as you like without aging. They have food that is incredibly blissful to the taste and doesn't have any, since they live so long, they have found ways to get rid of the negative effects of the lower factors. There is no effect of, for instance, Y or Z factor on these planets. It's a planetary city, and these beings enjoy life in a way that human beings, because we've created religious and societies of a political structure, we don't have the pleasure capacity they do. There's a race called the Ancient Ones, and the Ancient Ones are the first race to gain sentience in the universe. And we're all descended from this race. They see life all over the known universe. They have a special sequence of codes that one can recite at death that invokes life among the ancients. They live in giant flying pyramid structures. These pyramid structures are as large as several of Earth's cities. They were the first race to become conscious in the universe. These beings are probably 24 feet tall, but they can change and transform their phenotypical shape. They can look any way that they choose. These ships can travel from one galaxy to another within hours. They can travel from one dimension to another. These ships are the models for Earth's pyramids. The ancient ones is a great race to live among, at least for a short time. Gandon, my personal favorite. Gandon is a pure land world. It's a world that is purely enlightened and pure pleasure. It has extraordinarily advanced spiritual technology. It is inhabited by immortal gods, enlightened humans, and primordial deities. There is no death on Gandon. There's no disease on Gandon. There's no poverty on Gandon. There's no hunger on Gandon. Gandon is a place where a person cannot die. It is a pure world. As such, when a person enters into Gandon, they cannot experience suffering. Gandon is ruled by a person who was once human, and this person wanted to create a place where humans would no longer suffer. Their willpower was so strong that they tapped into sixth-dimensional energy and seventh-dimensional consciousness and created an entire world that we now know as Gandon. We have a website that is connected to our website called Gandon in honor of this great accomplishment in consciousness. Consciousness is able to create many things even just by thinking about it that we have not even conceived of yet. Gandon is a perfect world that is a great place to visit. The next place we're going to look at is called the Warding Gates. Warding Gates exist all around us, and they allow us access to the worlds that are accessible from Earth. We use each of them at night during sleep, during astral travel, and during soul travel. As the soul evolves, we use more and more sophisticated levels of travel through the gates, and no one knows who built them. These Warding Gates are important because they are ways that we travel from one dimension to another. Warding Gates are all around us, and there are spiritual orders and magical orders that have learned the codes to traverse these Warding Gates. Warding Gates are real. They are not just figments of someone's imagination, they are real places. And as we learn to use Warding Gates, we can use them in ways that almost seem like science fiction. This is a good picture of what a Warding Gate looks like. You may not see the gate. It may exist in a house, it may exist in a building, it may exist in an empty field, but they are real things that can be taken advantage of. We've now reached the end of our Spiritual World 2015, but we've only scratched the surface. We thank you very much for joining us, and we thank you so much for being part of our Spiritual World teaching. Thank you again, and we look forward to being with you.